Daniel 3:19 through 23. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and his face became livid against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now this is after they refused to bow to the idol that was set up. This is after he asked them privately, and they still refused. He demanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times hotter than normal. Now this furnace was used to make pottery and certain things originally used to make clay. Now, originally it wasn't designed. It may have been the furnace that built this idol in molten gold, and then they used maybe may have been the same furnace that built this gold. But the fact is, because they had refused to turn from their faith, they were threatening their lives. I'll get back to that idea in a minute. Then he commanded some of the strongest men in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them in the furnace blazing with fire. Now fire, it burns, but usually in hell and smoke, the fire don't get you, the smoke will. Sometimes before you actually get consumed with fire, depending on how bad the fire is. And this would have burned them. But if the fire had not consumed you yet, being around fire in an enclosed space is dangerous because you inhale smoke can suffocate you before the fire even touches you. So, with that being in the fire, being bound, they couldn't breathe, so they weren't able to think too much. They were in pain, so they wouldn't be able to think. They wouldn't have been able to move. They would have been helpless. This wasn't to teach them a lesson. It was to get rid of them, make an example of them. You know, early in this chapter we read how Daniel gets good favor with the king. The truth is that we may, as Christians, get good favor with people of the world. That doesn't mean they're Christians. Because Daniel got good favor with the king, that didn't make him a Christian. We shouldn't see him as one of the faith, because he wasn't. Daniel suited his interests, and he kept him around. There'll be times that we get used and is simply kept around by the world because we have value to them. But as for our buddies, they may be threatened for their lives. The thing with Daniel is, these were actually 3 officials as well. Their purpose in the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar wasn't as important as defying him. I say if Daniel would have refused to bow, which Daniel especially is not even mentioned in the story, he would have been thrown in the fiery furnace. Many think Daniel would have been in the story. Daniel may have been sent somewhere else during this time. is the fact that he went and stood for that idol being built in the first place. And sometimes we're going to be threatened with our lives for the faith. We're not here in America, we're not threatened for our lives. We got pretty easy, but you go in the Middle East, you're a Christian, it's a death sentence for you. You go in China, Asia, area, Southwest Asia, most of Asia actually, it's a death warrant. You go to Africa, nowadays, Islam's very law there, it's a death warrant. Being Christian oftentimes is a death warrant in certain countries, but it gives us life. And if we're not willing to give up, he gave his up for us, we should be willing to give ours up for his if we face that decision. There's been many who's died for the faith. Many who brought all the apostles died for the faith. With the exception of maybe John, perhaps, depending on your interpretation. Men who brought the English Bible to us today. The earliest were persecutors. People are going to face hate and persecution for our faith. It's not whether we are, it's just to what extent are we going to. I haven't been I haven't had my life on the line yet, but I have been persecuted as a Christian. It just showed me I was doing what I needed to do. Verse 21. So these men were bound in their cloaks, trousers, and turbans, and other garments, and thrown in the fiery furnace. The furnace blazing with fire. So they were just thrown in as is. God accepts us as is. And oftentimes, with most martyrs in that history, they don't wait. Paul had time. But most people, they got them, and they have done a quick trial, sometimes not, and then they just got rid of them. They put them to death. Oftentimes there is no waiting period, it's immediate. So there's no time to think of how to get out of it. God ain't going to give us time to get out of the faith. I think He strengthens us during that time with the wreck, you know. And when they had this decision to make, they knew that the king would have been against it. But they chose their faith. Anyway, we gotta be willing to choose our faith over anything. Verse 22. Because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace was so hot, the flames killed the men who picked up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So the men that threw them in the fire died from the heat. It was so hot that the fire may have jumped out and consumed them. Maybe the heat itself, not even catching them on fire, was just so hot it consumed them. Because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so hot, the flames killed those men that picked up. So the flames jumped out, and maybe an amber, maybe it caught them on fire. It was so hot, and them not being in it, they can't ignite it. Verse 23. So these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the fiery furnace, with the furnace blazing with fire. That is not the end of the story. They get out. But the fact is, the point I want to bring across today is we may be faced with putting our life on the line with our faith. And we need to stand strong like these men did. Christ stood strong for us. Esther 2:10. Or her kindred, for Mordecai had charged that she should not make it known. This is talking about she shouldn't have revealed herself. There's certain times we need to keep quiet about who we are, but we should never keep quiet about whose we are.